The small, velvet-covered box felt impossibly heavy in my palm, a leaden weight amidst the clinking glasses and forced laughter of the reception hall. My breath hitched, a sharp, cold shard in my throat. Every eye in this glittering room was on Sarah and Mark, swaying in their first dance, oblivious. But soon, very soon, those eyes would turn. This wasn't just a gift, it was a bomb, meticulously crafted, placed precisely for maximum impact. If you've ever felt the cold, hard clarity of absolute betrayal, the kind that rips the ground from beneath your feet, then like, subscribe, and stay with me, because this story isn't about love lost. It's about the truth unearthed, no matter the cost. My fingers tightened on the satin ribbon, the delicate fabric a stark contrast to the destruction it contained, a silent testament to the meticulously planned wreckage I was about to unleash. Just 2 years ago, the idea of me standing here, an uninvited guest, clutching a weaponized gift, would have been unthinkable. A grotesque fiction. Sarah and I were inseparable. From scraped knees in kindergarten to whispered secrets under dorm room blankets, she was my other half, the sister I chose, bound by more than blood. We had a pact, etched in childhood blood and reinforced by countless late-night talks under starry skies. No secrets, no betrayals, always each other's fiercest defender. We'd weathered everything life had thrown at us. My parents' brutal, drawn-out divorce that left me feeling adrift. Her own struggles with a demanding, perfectionist family. The bewildering, labyrinthine halls of university. Our dreams were so deeply intertwined they felt like a single, shared destiny. A small art studio, maybe, nestled in a quiet town, or a secluded cottage by the lake where we could paint and write and just be, creating beauty away from the world's harsh glare. She knew me, truly knew me, in a way no one else ever had, seeing past my quiet exterior to the passionate heart beneath. She was the first person I called with good news, the steady anchor when the world felt like it was spinning out of control. The one person who could always make me laugh even when tears blurred my vision. When I pictured my future, Sarah was always there, a constant, luminous presence, a given. Then Mark walked in, a seismic shift in the quiet landscape of our lives. He was a whirlwind of easy charm and captivating smiles, a landscape architect with laugh lines already etched around his eyes, and a voice that could coax confessions from stone. I met him at a mutual friend's barbecue, a casual summer evening that felt in hindsight like the precise moment a fault line opened beneath my feet. I fell, hard and fast, the kind of breathless, all-consuming love that steals your sleep and paints the world in technicolor, a dizzying intoxication I'd only ever read about in books. He saw me, he said, in a way no one else did. He listened, truly listened, to my rambling thoughts on obscure art history and complex philosophical debates, to my quiet anxieties about the future, to the unspoken fears that haunted my nights. He made me feel seen, cherished, like the most precious thing in his world. I told Sarah everything, of course, every flutter, every stolen glance, every breathless hope and fear. She was my confidant, my biggest cheerleader, her eyes shining with what I truly believed was genuine happiness for me. "He's perfect for you, Em," she'd said, her voice warm, her smile wide. "I can just tell, this is it." But then, tiny cracks began to appear, almost imperceptible at first, like hairline fractures in a priceless vase, a flicker in Mark's eyes when he looked at Sarah. Too long, too intense, quickly masked, a casual touch on her arm that lingered for a fraction of a second too long, a gesture that felt oddly intimate. I dismissed them, of course, pushing the uncomfortable observations deep down. Sarah was my best friend, my soul sister. Mark was the man I loved, the man who was supposed to be my future. My mind simply refused to connect those damning dots. My trust in Sarah was absolute, a bedrock of my existence, something as fundamental as breathing. She'd always been transparent, fiercely loyal, incapable of deceit. Why would she ever hide anything from me, especially something so monumental, so devastating? Yet the unease grew, a persistent, low hum beneath the surface of my otherwise burgeoning joy. Mark started calling Sarah more often, ostensibly about mutual friends or shared project ideas, but the frequency felt off. Their conversations would sometimes drop into hushed tones, their heads bent close together, only to resume with a sudden, almost forced cheerfulness when I entered the room. Sarah, usually an open book, became evasive about her plans, suddenly busy or swamped when I suggested our usual coffee dates or movie nights. My heart, once soaring with the promise of new love, began to feel like a trapped bird, beating frantically against the invisible bars of a cage I couldn't quite see. I rationalized it, of course, desperate to cling to the illusion. I told myself I was being paranoid, jealous even, an ugly trait I despised in myself. I tried to talk to Sarah, to ask if anything was wrong, if she was okay. She'd just smile, a little too brightly, her eyes skipping away from mine, and say, "Everything's fine, Em, just a lot on my plate with work." And Mark, he became almost overly attentive to me, showering me with compliments and small public gestures of affection, as if to ward off any suspicion, to build an even taller wall of normalcy around our crumbling reality. It felt hollow, manufactured, like a performance designed solely for my benefit. One unusually warm evening, a Tuesday, I remember with chilling clarity, I decided to surprise Sarah. She'd mentioned feeling overwhelmed with a particularly brutal work deadline, and I thought a homemade meal, her favorite lasagna, and a comforting movie night might lift her spirits. I drove to her apartment, a quiet, tree-lined street that always felt like coming home, a sanctuary. The light was on in her living room, a warm, inviting glow spilling onto the pavement. I smiled, picturing her curled on the sofa, probably surrounded by spreadsheets, exhausted but grateful. I walked up the worn flagstone path, my arms laden with groceries and a bottle of cheap wine, my heart light with the simple, uncomplicated joy of caring for my best friend. I reached for the doorknob, noticing it was slightly ajar, as if someone had left in a hurry, or, perhaps, was expecting someone. "Sarah," I called softly, pushing the door open just enough to step inside. The living room was empty, the air thick with an unfamiliar scent, something sweet and musky. But then I heard them, hushed voices, low murmurs, emanating unmistakably from her bedroom. A soft laugh, then another, too intimate, too familiar. My smile faltered, then died on my lips. My stomach dropped, a sickening, dizzying lurch that left me breathless. A cold dread, a premonition of unimaginable pain washed over me. And then, a voice I knew intimately, a voice that had whispered promises in my ear, that had sworn eternal love, spoke clearly, cutting through the sudden, deafening silence of the apartment like a razor. "She'll never know, my love. Not if we're careful." It was Mark, and the soft answering sigh, the one that followed, thick with contentment, could only have been Sarah's. My world, the one I had built on a foundation of unshakable trust and unwavering love, splintered into a million irreparable pieces around me, leaving only a vast, echoing void. The words "us" and "forever" echoed, not from a dream, but from the brutal reality of Sarah's bedroom, slicing through me like shards of ice. My blood ran cold, then boiled. Mark, Sarah, together, my best friend, the man I loved. It was a grotesque, impossible tableau playing out behind a flimsy door. I didn't breathe. I couldn't. My lungs felt paralyzed, my chest a tight band of agony. The laughter, Sarah's sweet, familiar laugh, was now a poisoned melody, each note a betrayal. I stumbled back, a phantom pain shooting through my knees. The hallway seemed to stretch, distort, the air thick with unspoken lies. My hands flew to my mouth, stifling a scream that clawed at my throat. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. Sarah, my Sarah, the one who knew every secret, every hope, every fear, who had promised me sisterhood forever. She wouldn't. Not like this. Not to me. The thought was a bleeding wound. I fled. Not a graceful exit, but a blind, desperate escape. I ran past the closed door, past the living room, out the front door, the key fumbling in my shaking hand as I locked it behind me. The cool night air hit my face, but offered no solace. My car was a blur of motion. I drove aimlessly, the city lights blurring into streaking tears. The radio played a saccharine love song, and I slammed my fist on the dashboard, the sound swallowed by the roar in my ears. The world had tilted on its axis. Everything I thought I knew, everything I believed in, was a lie. Sarah's smile, Mark's gentle touch, all of it tainted, rotten to the core. A bitter taste filled my mouth. For days, I was a ghost. I didn't answer calls, didn't open texts. My apartment became a tomb, the curtains drawn against the intrusive light of a world that continued spinning without me. The silence was deafening, filled only with the replay of their voices, their laughter, their sickening plans. Food tasted like ash. Sleep was a cruel mockery, punctuated by nightmares of white dresses and knowing smiles. I stared at my reflection, seeing a stranger, hollow-eyed, gaunt, a raw wound of a person. How could I have been so blind, so utterly, painfully naive? Was I so easily discarded? Sarah tried to call, a dozen times, then 20. Her messages were chirpy, oblivious, or perhaps feigning obliviousness. "Hey, where'd you go? You just vanished. Call me back. Worried about you." Each one was a fresh stab. Mark sent a polite, distant text, asking if I was okay, if I'd left anything at Sarah's. The audacity of his casual concern, knowing the wreckage he'd left in his wake. It was a special kind of hell, watching them pretend, knowing what they had done. I deleted their numbers, blocked them, severed the connection with a desperate, painful swipe of my thumb, a final cut. The numbness eventually began to recede, replaced by a cold, burning anger. It wasn't just heartbreak anymore. It was a profound sense of injustice. They had stolen my future, twisted my past, and then dared to walk away clean, as if I were merely an inconvenient obstacle removed from their path. I lay awake one night, the anger a searing heat in my belly, a fire that consumed the lingering pain. What did they deserve? What did I deserve? Not this silent suffering, not this slow, agonizing fade into oblivion. Then came the invitation, a thick, cream-colored envelope, embossed with elegant script, my name meticulously inked, a cruel joke. Inside, the formal announcement, Sarah and Mark, engaged, a summer wedding. My breath caught, a harsh, ragged sound in the quiet apartment. They were making it real. They were parading their stolen happiness, their calculated betrayal for the world to see, expecting me to simply fade into the background. A wave of nausea washed over me, followed by a surge of something colder, harder. This wasn't just about my pain. This was about their arrogance, their deceit, the sheer brazenness of it all. I remembered something then, a fleeting conversation months ago, dismissed at the time as trivial. Mark had been complaining about a cash flow problem with a new business venture, a vague mention of needing a quick win. I'd dismissed it then, a typical guy complaining about work, nothing more. But now it snagged in my mind a tiny, irritating burr. He'd seemed so confident, so financially secure, always picking up the tab, talking about investments, flashing expensive watches. Was it all a front? The question, once planted, began to sprout, feeding on my rage. My fingers, still trembling with a residual tremor, found their way to my laptop. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, just a thread, a loose end, anything to make sense of the monstrous lie they had built. I started with simple searches. Mark Thompson Business Ventures, Mark Thompson Investments. The internet was a vast ocean of information, and I cast my net wide, driven by a desperate need for answers, for anything that could explain his true nature. At first, nothing, just generic profiles, a few LinkedIn connections, a clean, unblemished digital footprint. Then, a small, local news article from a few years back. Luxury car dealership files for bankruptcy amid allegations of mismanagement. The name of the dealership was familiar. Mark had mentioned working there briefly before meeting Sarah. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. The article didn't name him directly, but it talked about shady dealings, unpaid debts, and a sudden quiet closure that left investors reeling. It was a lead, a dark, unsettling thread in the tapestry of his carefully constructed persona. I dug deeper. Public records, business registries, court dockets. It was tedious, frustrating work. Hours blurred into days, but the anger fueled me, a relentless engine. Every dead end, every brick wall only hardened my resolve. I remembered Sarah's naive admiration for his business acumen, how she'd gushed about his vision, how he always seemed to have money, even if he never quite explained where it came from. The pieces began to shift, to click into place, forming a picture far more sinister than simple romantic betrayal. He wasn't just a cheat in love, he was a cheat, period. The next morning, I woke with a new purpose. The heartbreak was still there, a dull ache, but it was overshadowed by a chilling clarity. This wasn't just about a broken heart. This was about a man who built his life on deception, a predator, and my best friend was about to walk blindly into his trap, perhaps even become another one of his victims. The bankruptcy article was just the beginning. There had to be more, and I would find it. I started compiling a list of names, companies, dates, a meticulous web of connections. The hunt had begun. My phone buzzed with another message from Sarah, a cheerful photo of her in a bridal shop, holding up a shimmering white dress, her face alight with an innocent joy that twisted my gut. I looked at it, then back at my screen, where another search result was loading. A court document, a legal dispute, Mark Thompson, defendant. The details were obscured, but the title alone sent a shiver down my spine. The file name, Foreclosure Proceedings. This wasn't a cash flow problem. This was a ticking time bomb, and Sarah was standing right on top of it. The sight of that embossed invitation in my hand felt like a physical blow, a mocking declaration of a future I'd once envisioned for myself, now stolen and twisted. Sarah and Mark, engaged, the words seared, but beneath the familiar ache of betrayal, a cold, hard curiosity had begun to take root. It wasn't just about them anymore. It was about him. There was a hollowness in Mark's charm, a slippery quality I'd dismissed as an illusion of my own jealousy. Now, it demanded inspection. I started small, with what anyone could find. Public records, obscure news archives, the fringes of social media. It began as a desperate attempt to understand, to rationalize. Was he truly so perfect, so magnetic that Sarah couldn't resist? Or was there something else? The deeper I dug, the clearer the picture became, and it was far more insidious than a simple affair. Mark wasn't just charming, he was a chameleon, a predator in a tailored suit. His past was a carefully constructed facade. Failed businesses, not just one, but a string of them, each closing under a cloud of unpaid invoices and disgruntled investors. There were whispers of lawsuits settled out of court, small claims for bounced checks, even a brief, hushed mention of a property foreclosure that somehow disappeared from public view. It wasn't grand, dramatic fraud that caught the attention of federal agents, but a persistent, low-level financial malfeasance, a consistent pattern of taking more than he gave, of leaving wreckage behind. He moved from city to city, relationship to relationship, each time leaving a trail of minor financial disasters that were just small enough to be dismissed as bad luck or poor judgment by those who didn't look closely. My heart began to pound with a different kind of fear, not for myself, but for Sarah. She wasn't just marrying a man who had betrayed me. She was marrying a man who would, inevitably, betray her. Her trust, her future, her very financial security. It was all vulnerable. I thought of Sarah's naive optimism, her unwavering belief in the good in people, a trait I had always admired but now saw as a gaping vulnerability. Mark would bleed her dry, just as he had done to others. This wasn't just about my broken heart anymore. It was about protecting Sarah, even if she didn't know she needed protecting, even if she would hate me for it. The pain of my personal betrayal curdled into a simmering, protective rage. This wasn't revenge for a lost love. It was a desperate act of intervention. I needed irrefutable proof, something that couldn't be dismissed as a scorned woman's bitterness. I spent weeks, sometimes entire nights, submerged in the digital detritus of Mark's past. I learned how to navigate obscure financial databases, how to cross-reference property deeds with loan applications, how to spot the subtle shifts in corporate filings that masked deeper problems. I found his aliases, the shell companies, the false addresses. It was like piecing together a monstrous, invisible jigsaw puzzle, each fragment a testament to his deceit. I uncovered a particularly damning trail of evidence, a series of high-interest personal loans he'd taken out under Sarah's name, without her knowledge, tied to a property he'd promised to buy for them. The paperwork was meticulously forged, his signature on her behalf chillingly precise. And then there were the hidden credit lines, maxed out, tied to gambling debts he was desperately trying to conceal. He was living a lie, funding it with borrowed money and Sarah's unwitting future. The total was staggering, far more than anything they could hope to pay back once Sarah's assets were entwined with his. She would be bankrupt. She would lose everything. As I collected each document, scanned copies of loan agreements, bank statements, legal notices, I meticulously organized them. Tabs, labels, a clear chronological order. This wasn't a messy pile of accusations. It was a dossier, a legal argument in waiting. I knew then, with absolute certainty, how I would deliver this truth. Not with a shout, not with an accusation, but with a quiet, undeniable force. The idea of the wedding gift had been a fleeting, vengeful thought initially, born of pure malice. But as the true depths of Mark's deception became clear, it transformed. It wasn't just about hurting them anymore. It was about exposure, about truth, about shattering the illusion before it consumed Sarah entirely. The gift would be small, innocuous, easily overlooked amidst the lavish display of their new life. But inside, it would hold the weight of their ruin. I pictured the moment, the hushed whispers, Sarah's face as the truth dawned. It was a grim vision, but one I felt compelled to orchestrate. The raw grief that had consumed me in the weeks after the engagement announcement had been replaced by a cold, surgical focus. My hands no longer trembled with despair, but with the steady resolve of a surgeon about to perform a life-saving, albeit painful, operation. The only emotion left was a chilling determination, a quiet hum of purpose. I was no longer the heartbroken friend. I was an avenging angel, armed with facts and a profound sense of grim justice. Then the formal wedding invitation arrived. Heavy cardstock, elegant script, a date circled in gold. It was real. It was happening. I smoothed the paper with a hand that didn't shake, a stark contrast to the storm raging within. Beside it, on my desk, lay the carefully compiled stack of documents, a thick folder of financial ruin. The weight of my decision pressed down, a tangible burden. There was no turning back now. The invitation arrived, a thick cream-colored card, embossed with swirling gold script. Sarah and Mark, united in matrimony. It felt like a joke, a cruel, elaborate prank played by the universe. I traced the elegant font, my finger brushing over their intertwined initials, and a bitter laugh escaped me. They had no idea what kind of gift awaited them. My first instinct, a faint lingering echo of the friend I once knew, was to try and warn her. Not directly, not yet. I knew that would be futile. Sarah was wrapped in a cocoon of infatuation, blinded by the fantasy Mark had woven. Instead, I opted for subtlety. A few carefully placed seeds of doubt, hoping one might sprout. "Are you really sure about this, Sarah?" I'd asked one afternoon, watching her pore over swatches of fabric for bridesmaid dresses. "Marriage is a huge step. You really know everything about him?" She looked up, her eyes sparkling with an almost manic joy. "Of course, I do. He's wonderful, Emily. You just don't see it because, well, you're not in love with him." Her voice held a note of pity, which twisted the knife deeper. "Besides, what's there to know? We've talked about everything." "Everything?" I pressed gently, my voice carefully neutral. "Like finances, past debts, any significant history?" A faint flicker of annoyance crossed her face. "Em, you're being weird. Mark's great with money. He's got big plans. And anyway, that's not exactly first date conversation, is it?" She laughed. A light, dismissive sound. "You worry too much. You always did." The conversation died there, a dead end. She was impenetrable. My warnings, however veiled, bounced off her wall of blissful ignorance. It was like trying to reason with a dream. Mark, however, was a different story. He felt it. My coldness, my quiet observations, the way my smile didn't quite reach my eyes when he was around. He approached me at a mutual friends gathering, a glass of champagne in hand, his usual confident swagger slightly deflated. "Emily," he began, his voice smooth, a practiced charm that once disarmed me. "We haven't talked much lately. Everything okay? You seem distant." I met his gaze, holding it steady. "I've been busy. I replied, my voice flat. Life gets in the way. He chuckled, a forced sound. Right. Listen, I know things might have been a little awkward with Sarah and me getting together so suddenly, but I hope you understand. These things just happen, and you're her best friend, you know? It would mean the world to Sarah if you were happy for us. He reached out, his hand hovering, as if to touch my arm, but I subtly shifted away. I wish Sarah happiness, I said, the words tasting like ash. True happiness. His smile faltered. Is there something you're trying to say, Emily? His eyes narrowed, a hint of steel beneath the practiced warmth, the predator glimpsing its prey. Only that truth has a way of coming out, I stated, my voice barely above a whisper, but laced with a quiet certainty that made him stiffen. I watched his facade crack, just for a second. A flicker of unease, of suspicion, crossed his features before he quickly reasserted control. Well, I'm a big believer in truth, he said, forcing a grin that didn't reach his eyes. And the truth is, Sarah and I are very happy. He walked away then, probably sensing the futility of further charm, or perhaps a nascent fear beginning to stir within him. That interaction solidified my resolve. He was a snake, charming and dangerous, and Sarah was walking into his coils, blind and vulnerable. My gift wasn't just revenge, it was an act of brutal, necessary intervention. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a blur of social media updates and excited phone calls from Sarah. She gushed about the floral arrangements, the custom-made invitations, the 5-tier cake. She sent me pictures of her dress, a confection of lace and silk, the embodiment of a fairy tale. Each detail she shared, each burst of joyous anticipation, felt like a fresh wound. I saw it all not as the building of a beautiful future, but as the meticulous construction of a house of cards, destined to collapse under the weight of the truth. It was a macabre spectacle, and I, the unseen architect of its downfall, watched with a grim, almost detached fascination. The gift itself became a project. I wanted something unassuming, elegant, something that would blend seamlessly with the other wedding presents. I found a small, ornate wooden box, intricately carved with a floral pattern, at an antique store. It was beautiful, innocent even, the perfect Trojan horse. Inside, I carefully placed the meticulously organized dossier, bank statements showing the spiraling credit card debt, loan agreements with predatory interest rates, a copy of the bankruptcy filing from his previous failed business venture, and most damningly, a series of emails between Mark and a shady financial advisor discussing how to conceal assets and manipulate credit scores. Each document was a nail in his coffin, proof of a lifetime of financial recklessness and deceit. I even included a printout of an online forum where a previous business partner detailed Mark's history of abandoning projects and leaving others with the financial fallout. It was all there, undeniable, irrefutable. There were moments, brief, fleeting moments when a wave of doubt would wash over me. Was I doing the right thing? Was this truly justice or just a vengeful act born of hurt? The thought of Sarah's face, contorted in pain and shock, made my stomach clench. The friendship we once shared, so profound, so unbreakable, would be utterly incinerated. There would be no coming back from this. No apology could mend it. No explanation could justify it. This was the point of no return. But then, the memory of that night, the hushed voices, the stolen glances, the sickening realization that my best friend and the man I loved had conspired behind my back would flood my mind. The image of Sarah, radiant and oblivious, about to tie her future to a man who saw her as little more than a financial stepping stone, would solidify my resolve. This wasn't just about me, it was about her, and the truth, however painful, was her only salvation. The day of the wedding arrived with a crisp autumn chill. The sky was a pale, indifferent blue. I dressed mechanically, pulling on a simple navy dress, chosen for its anonymity. No bright colors, no elaborate patterns. I wanted to be a shadow, present but unseen, until the moment I chose to step into the light. My hands trembled slightly as I picked up the small wooden box, wrapped in elegant silver paper and tied with a delicate white ribbon. It felt impossibly heavy, weighted not by its contents but by the enormity of what it represented. a friendship destroyed, a love betrayed, a future obliterated. I looked at my reflection in the mirror, my eyes stark, resolute. There was no turning back now. The curtain was about to rise. The grand ballroom shimmered under 1,000 tiny lights, a meticulously crafted illusion of joy. White roses cascaded from every surface, their perfume cloying, almost suffocating. Crystal chandeliers dripped luminescence onto polished marble floors, reflecting the giddy faces of guests, all dressed in their finest, all oblivious. I walked through the throng, each step a deliberate, controlled movement, my heart a dull, heavy drum in my chest. The air hummed with laughter, clinking glasses and the saccharine strains of a string quartet playing something romantic, something utterly false. I spotted Sarah by the grand staircase, a vision in ivory lace, her smile so wide it looked painted on. Mark stood beside her, a hand casually resting on the small of her back, his eyes darting across the room, a predator scanning his territory. He looked impossibly handsome, impeccably tailored, every inch the charming groom, a performance so convincing it almost made my stomach churn. He leaned in, whispering something in Sarah's ear that made her giggle, her head tilting back in genuine, unburdened delight. The sight of her, so utterly innocent in her happiness, was a dagger. It twisted the cold knot in my gut, reminding me why I was here, why this had to happen. She had built this perfect, fragile world on a foundation of lies, and he, the architect of her ruin, stood smiling, untouchable. Not for long. My gaze drifted to the gift table, a sprawling expanse laden with ribbons and glittering paper. It was tucked away in a quiet alcove, a discreet gesture for a couple who ostensibly had everything. My hand, surprisingly steady, reached into my clutch. The small, unassuming box, wrapped in understated silver paper, felt disproportionately heavy, a miniature vault of impending catastrophe. I moved towards the table, my pace unhurried, my expression carefully neutral. A distant cousin of Sarah's, whom I barely knew, offered a polite nod as I approached. I returned it, my lips forming a faint, unconvincing smile. My fingers lingered on the box for a moment, the smooth paper a stark contrast to the rough, jagged edges of the truth it contained. Then, with a gentle, almost reverent motion, I placed it among the other offerings. It looked innocuous, just another token of well wishes, but I knew better. It was a ticking bomb, disguised as a blessing. The reception unfolded in a slow-motion agony of forced pleasantries and internal screaming. I accepted a glass of champagne, the bubbles doing little to cut through the bitter taste in my mouth. I exchanged vapid small talk with distant relatives, their questions about my life feeling like distant echoes through a fog. "So good to see you, Emily. What a beautiful day, isn't it?" "Yes, truly lovely," I'd murmur, my gaze constantly drifting back to Sarah and Mark, who moved through the room like royalty, bathed in the glow of their deception. I watched Mark charm Sarah's elderly aunt, his laughter a little too loud, his compliments a little too extravagant. I saw him subtly steer Sarah away from a group of her old college friends, a fleeting moment of control that only I seemed to notice. He was a master puppeteer, and Sarah, my once sharp, discerning Sarah, was a willing marionette. Dinner was a blur of rich food I couldn't taste, and conversations I couldn't follow. The speeches began. Sarah's father, beaming with pride, spoke of Mark as the son he never had. My jaw tightened. A bridesmaid, teary-eyed, recounted tales of Sarah's unwavering loyalty and big heart. The irony was a physical ache in my chest. Mark, in turn, delivered a heartfelt, eloquent tribute to Sarah, his voice thick with emotion, his eyes glistening. "She is the purest soul I know," he declared, his hand reaching for hers. "My rock, my everything." A collective awe rippled through the room. I wanted to laugh, a harsh, bitter sound that would shatter the fragile peace. Instead, I simply watched, my face a mask of polite attentiveness, my mind racing, calculating, waiting. Every word he spoke, every tender gesture, amplified the lie, making the impending explosion feel not just justified, but necessary. The music swelled, and the first dance began. Sarah and Mark swayed gracefully across the floor, lost in each other's eyes, a tableau of perfect, idealized love. It was a scene from a dream I had once shared, now twisted into a nightmare. I remembered the night Sarah and I had spent poring over wedding magazines, fantasizing about our own big days, about finding the one. We'd promised to be each other's maid of honor, to navigate the chaos together. Now I stood alone, a ghost at a wedding that should have been mine, or at least one where my best friend wasn't marrying the man who had stolen my future. The pain was sharp, but it was a familiar pain now, dulled by the cold steel of my resolve. I felt strangely calm, almost serene, as if I were watching a play unfold, knowing exactly how the final act would devastate its unsuspecting audience. The night wore on. The dance floor filled. The energy in the room grew louder, more boisterous, a crescendo of celebration. I saw Sarah excuse herself from a dance with Mark, heading towards the quiet alcove where the gifts were piled high. My breath hitched. This was it. The moment I had meticulously planned. The culmination of weeks of relentless digging, of sleepless nights fueled by anger and a desperate need for justice. My eyes locked onto her. She moved with an easy grace, her white dress flowing around her. She paused by the table, her head tilted, a soft smile playing on her lips as she looked at the array of brightly wrapped packages. My heart hammered against my ribs. A frantic bird trapped in a cage. My palms grew slick. This was not about malice, I reminded myself. This was about truth. It was about saving her from a fate worse than heartbreak, or so I told myself. Sarah's hand extended, her fingers, adorned with a sparkling new wedding band, reached out. They hovered for a moment, then, as if drawn by an invisible thread, they gently brushed against the silver paper of the small, unassuming box. The reception pulsed with a manufactured joviality. Every laugh, every clink of champagne glasses, a dissonant echo in the grand ballroom. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs, as I watched Sarah's hand, adorned with a delicate white glove, reach for the gift table. Her fingers, long and elegant, brushed past a crystal vase and a set of engraved champagne flutes, landing precisely on the silver box I had chosen with such meticulous care. A small, almost imperceptible smile played on her lips as she picked it up. The ribbon, a deep sapphire blue, shimmering under the opulent chandeliers. She gave it a gentle shake, a playful tilt of her head. Then, with a casual grace that tore at something deep inside me, she slipped a manicured finger under the bow and untied it. The lid lifted without resistance, revealing the neatly folded documents nestled within. For a fleeting second, her brow furrowed in confusion. It wasn't a conventional gift. There was no soft tissue paper, no shimmer of expensive trinkets, just plain, stark white paper. She pulled the top sheet out, her eyes scanning the lines, and the casual smile began to crumble. Her breath hitched. I saw it, even from across the room, the subtle stiffening of her shoulders, the way her eyes widened, not with surprise, but with a dawning horror that spread across her face like a bruise. Mark, ever the attentive groom, leaned in, a solicitous smile plastered on his face. "What is it, darling? Did someone get us a new tax form?" He chuckled, a sound that grated on my ears, oblivious to the storm brewing right beside him. Sarah didn't answer. Her gaze was fixed on the document in her hand, then on the others still in the box. She pulled out a second, then a third, her movements becoming jerky, uncoordinated. Her free hand flew to her mouth, a small, choked gasp escaping her lips. The music, a cheerful string quartet playing a classical waltz, suddenly seemed too loud, too bright. A few guests nearby, drawn by Sarah's sudden stillness, began to turn their heads. Mark, finally sensing the shift, leaned closer, his smile dissolving into a frown. He tried to take the papers from her, his hand reaching out, but Sarah clutched them to her chest, her eyes wide and wet, fixed not on the documents but on him. "What is this, Mark?" Her voice, usually so clear and bright, was a raw whisper, thick with disbelief. What is all of this?" His eyes darted to the box, then back to her face, then, for a terrifying, heart-stopping moment, they landed on me. The veneer of charm vanished, replaced by a flash of pure, unadulterated panic. His jaw tightened, and he lunged for the papers, a desperate, clumsy grab. "Sarah, "Give those to me. It's nothing. A joke, a misunderstanding." But it was too late. One of the documents, a printed bank statement, slipped from Sarah's trembling fingers and fluttered to the pristine white carpet. A bridesmaid standing nearby bent to pick it up, her polite smile fading as her eyes registered the bold, damning figures. She gasped, a soft, sharp sound that cut through the music. Another guest, Sarah's Aunt Carol, peered over her shoulder. Then another. Whispers started like a ripple in a still pond, growing louder, turning into a murmur that swept through the nearby tables. The music, as if sensing the shift in atmosphere, faltered, the violins scraping to an uncertain halt. Sarah stumbled back, the remaining papers still clutched in her hand. "These are your debts, Mark, all of them. The failed investments, the loans, the foreclosures. This isn't a joke. This is ruin." Her voice, though still hoarse, was rising, carrying across the stunned silence of the ballroom. "You told me you were financially secure. You told me you had investments. You lied to me." Mark's face was a mask of furious, desperate denial. "Sarah, calm down. This is a setup. Someone put these here. This is Emily's doing." His eyes, filled with accusation, swung back to me, trying to deflect, to pin the blame. But the damage was done. Sarah, blinded by love, had never seen it. Now the scales had fallen. "Emily?" Sarah's voice cracked, her gaze flicking between us, a fresh wave of betrayal washing over her face. But the evidence in her hands was irrefutable. "No, these are real. I recognize the bank logos. This is your signature. You borrowed against your parents' house. You defaulted on the business loan for a company that never existed?" Her voice escalated into a full-blown scream, the sound tearing through the elegant room. "You're a fraud. You married me for money." The room erupted. Guests stood, chairs scraping against the floor. Some gasped, some pointed, some looked on with horrified fascination. Sarah's mother, a formidable woman, rushed forward, her face ashen, pulling Sarah into her arms. Mark's father, a stout, red-faced man, grabbed his son by the arm, his own face a thundercloud of rage and humiliation. Accusations flew, words like liar, deceiver, scandal, echoing off the high ceilings. The string quartet, abandoned, sat frozen, their instruments silent, the carefully constructed facade of joy shattered into a million pieces, scattering across the polished marble floor. I stood there, a silent observer in the eye of the storm I had unleashed. The satisfaction was there, a cold, bitter taste in my mouth, but it was not the triumph I had imagined. It was a hollow, desolate feeling. Watching Sarah's face crumple, seeing the absolute devastation in her eyes, twisted something inside me. This wasn't just about Mark's deceit. It was about the destruction of a friendship, the obliteration of a dream Sarah had held so dear, however misguided. The revenge was complete. Mark was exposed, his lies laid bare for everyone to see. Sarah's perfect wedding, her perfect future, lay in ruins around her. The chaos was absolute, a maelstrom of shouting, crying, and panicked whispers. Mark, cornered and exposed, was now yelling, trying to push past his father, his eyes still fixed on me, a desperate, venomous glint in them. I had done what I set out to do. The truth was out, but the silence, the deafening silence that followed my own personal victory, was far more unsettling than any noise. I turned slowly, my legs feeling heavy, each step a conscious effort. The grand doors of the ballroom, once welcoming, now felt like a portal to an unknown, solitary future. I pushed through them, leaving behind the wreckage, the sound of Sarah's heartbroken sobs echoing in my ears, a chilling reminder of the irreversible cost of justice. The wedding hall became a scene from a nightmare. The music died, replaced by the rising clamor of gasps and outraged whispers. Sarah, clutching the papers, her face a mask of disbelief, had screamed Mark's name, not in love, but in a raw, guttural cry of betrayal. He'd tried to snatch the documents, his charm evaporating into a desperate, sweating panic, but it was too late. His parents, horrified, had intervened, and Sarah's own family, seeing the damning evidence, had turned on him with a fury that felt primal. The last image I saw as I slipped out, unnoticed in the chaos, was Sarah on the floor, weeping, surrounded by the remnants of her shattered dream. The perfect white dress, soiled, the opulent flowers, a mockery, the air, thick with the stench of ruined lives. I went home to an apartment that felt too quiet, too empty. The adrenaline that had fueled me for weeks drained away, leaving behind a profound exhaustion. There was no triumphant cheer, no surge of vindication, only a dull ache, a hollow space where a friendship had once lived, a love had once bloomed, and a future had once been imagined. The phone rang constantly for days, a mix of concerned friends, curious acquaintances, and even some reporters who had somehow pieced together my involvement. I ignored them all. I needed silence, a place to sift through the wreckage of my own making. The news was everywhere. Millionaire's son exposed as fraud at own wedding. Bride left at altar as fiancé's debts revealed. Mark's carefully constructed facade crumbled publicly. His father, a man of considerable influence, initially tried to contain the damage, but the evidence was irrefutable. Mark faced a flurry of lawsuits from creditors, investigations into his past business dealings, and the complete collapse of his social standing. He became a pariah, his name synonymous with deceit. I heard he eventually fled the city, unable to face the fallout. There was no joy in his ruin, only the cold satisfaction that justice, in its own brutal way, had been served. Sarah's silence was the loudest sound. For weeks, I waited, bracing myself for her anger, her accusations, her grief. When her name finally flashed on my screen, my heart hammered against my ribs. It was a text message, short and to the point. "Can we talk? Not now. Soon." The soon stretched into another month. I started seeing a therapist grappling with the complex emotions that revenge had stirred. The betrayal had left deep scars, but so too had the act of inflicting pain, even if justified. I realized I hadn't just exposed Mark. I had obliterated Sarah's future, and that weighed heavily. I began to understand that while I had sought to reveal the truth, the manner of its revelation had been born of my own profound pain, not pure altruism. When Sarah finally called, her voice was thin, raw, devoid of its usual brightness. "I saw him, Emily," she said, her words barely a whisper. "He came back to try and get some things. He blamed you. He said you were jealous, vindictive. But then he tried to explain the debts. He twisted everything. He looked at me like I was stupid for believing him. And then I knew. I knew you hadn't lied. He'd lied to everyone, most of all to me." There was no anger in her voice, only a bottomless well of hurt. She didn't forgive me for what I did at the wedding, not explicitly, but she understood why I did it. She knew Mark's truth. We talked for hours that day, a conversation filled with tears, apologies, and a painful unpacking of every secret, every lie. It wasn't about repairing our friendship back to what it was. That was impossible. It was about acknowledging the shared wreckage, the common enemy, and the truth that had burned everything down. Sarah moved out of the city, started fresh somewhere new. We didn't keep in constant touch, but we exchanged messages occasionally, quiet updates on our lives. It was a fragile connection, a scar tissue of what had once been unbreakable, but it was real. For me, the journey was about rediscovering myself. I left my old job, which had become tainted with memories of them. I started volunteering at an animal shelter, finding solace in simple, uncomplicated affection. I joined a book club, met new people, people who knew nothing of the woman I had been, or the dramatic inferno I had unleashed. I began to write, not for revenge, but for healing, pouring my emotions onto pages that no one else would ever read. It was a slow, arduous process, but I was finally building a life not defined by betrayal or the need for retribution, but by my own choices, my own passions. The ache for Mark, for Sarah, for the life I thought I'd have, slowly faded into a dull throb, a phantom limb. I learned that revenge, while it can expose lies, rarely brings peace. True peace came from within, from accepting the past, forgiving myself for my own pain-driven actions, and moving forward with integrity. My heart, once a battlefield, was slowly becoming a garden again. Fragile, new shoots pushing through the scorched earth. I was stronger, more resilient, and fiercely protective of my own truth. But sometimes, late at night, a single, lingering question still flickered in the quiet darkness of my mind. Was it truly over, or had the act of revealing such a devastating truth merely opened a door to other, unforeseen consequences, waiting just beyond the horizon?